Delighted to be joined now by the Conservative MP for Shrewsbury. Oh, I don't think we've actually quite got... No, we do. Daniel Kawczynski can join us now, the Member of Parliament for Shrewsbury. Thank you for joining us this morning, Daniel. First of all, do you believe that the Prime Minister is the best person for the job?
Well, what I would say is that she has been democratically elected by the members of the Conservative Party across the whole of the United Kingdom. And it's too early to tell, just after 4 or 5 weeks of her premiership, what sort of Prime Minister she's going to be. And we're British. We don't tend to throw people under a bus unnecessarily until we understand fully their attributes, their skill sets, and their ability to run the country. And I'm very concerned about this sort of hysterical witch hunt against the Prime Minister. She's a very courageous woman who is dealing with unprecedented difficulties for the United Kingdom because all governments historically have borrowed money. And the chickens are coming home to roost at the moment. When you are £2.1 trillion in debt, when you've got debt interest payments of £90 billion per annum, these are difficulties of biblical proportions. I admire her courage. I regret that the policies that were announced have not succeeded through the international markets, and very much hope that the parliamentary party can get behind her and the new Chancellor to get us through this economic and political storm, because ultimately the real adversary is the Labour Party. And let's not forget, they have not come up with an credible economic alternative. That's what the next election has to be about. No longer will the British electorate tolerate a debate about how to redistribute the shrinking cake that we have. They want an analysis and debate as to how we grow the economy and how we ultimately create an economy which pays for itself rather than continuing to borrow money on an annual basis.
Well, Daniel Kawczynski, we will be putting that question to the Labour MP Peter Dowd a little bit later in the programme. But for now, is it your view that the U-turns that this Prime Minister has performed, I've lost count of the number of U-turns she has now performed, were they, in your view, the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do?
Well, the U-turn was, in my view, absolutely wrong, and I very much regret that. I think that what they wanted to do ultimately at this moment in time is to borrow £45 billion in order to, in addition to helping people with the energy costs, they wanted to borrow £45 billion to change the taxation system so that we no longer have highly pernicious levels of taxation across the board. And let's get this into perspective. £45 billion is 2% of the national debt. And the amount that was going to go to the top 1%, £2 billion, is 0.1% of the national debt. So these are relatively modest figures. If you put it in the context of the whole of the national debt, we can no longer continue, as I said, to carry on with the previous model of borrowing money every year and not paying for ourselves. We need a radical change in the taxation system. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of highly skilled Britons have left this country over the last few decades. They've closed their factories and they have moved to jurisdictions where taxation is far less. The top level of taxation in Singapore is 16%. How on earth can we expect to compete against countries like Singapore, the United Arab Emirates, and many other jurisdictions around the world if we continue to have levels of taxation which penalize entrepreneurs and penalize the wealth creators, people that we need to retain and attract to the United Kingdom in a post-Brexit context? So I regret that U-turn. I think we should have stayed strong as a party, strong as a country, to get through the requirement of that borrowing. I regret the U-turn, no doubt about
The
it.
United Kingdom's debt to GDP ratio is indeed less than that of the United States, less than that of Canada, of Italy, of France, of Japan. Why then did the Prime Minister U-turn? Do you think she would be in a stronger position now had she stayed the course?
Well, that's a brilliant question, and of course it's one that I've made repeatedly. If the United Kingdom, and by the way, the socialists admonished us and the most vilified us when we came into office in 2010 for having the temerity of trying to get the public finances back into the black. Every year from 2010 to 2019, we've reduced the annual deficit. 2019, the year before the pandemic started, is the closest that this country has come to running a balanced budget. I'm very proud of the fact that we did that work. If we hadn't done that work, the situation would be even more difficult. But yes, your point is absolutely correct. Our debt to GDP ratio is much lower than most of our industrial competitors, especially France, Italy, and Japan. And so I'm very surprised the markets reacted in the way that they did. If the United Kingdom had been the most indebted nation of the G8 and the G20, and we were going in to borrow an extra £45 billion, I could understand them being worried and reticent. But it's the direct opposite is the truth. And so you have to ask yourself the question, who is it in the British establishment, either at the Treasury or the Bank of England, or in the House of Commons, or in the media? Who is it who is responsible for not getting behind the United Kingdom at this difficult time and showing division from the British side, which ultimately led to a lack of confidence in lending Britain that extra £45 billion? That's the question that I want to have answered.
That's a really interesting point there. You, Daniel Kawczynski, are pointing to division and perhaps undermining from various institutions in the United Kingdom for that instability. We'll hold that thought, but thank you so much for joining us here on The Briefing this morning. Really appreciate your thoughts and your time.